Hey, what's up guys? Today I'm going to continue my Linguistics 101 video series, and today we're talking about semantics, which is the study of meaning. And in past videos in this series, we've talked about different branches of linguistics that have to do with the sounds of language, they have to do with the form or the structure of language, and today we're going to start talking about the branches of linguistics that have to do specifically with meaning. Now, what does that mean? Because obviously all of linguistics is the study of language, and we use language to mean stuff. So in some sense, almost all branches of linguistics are the study of meaning in some sense, except for maybe the phonetics video that we did earlier. But syntax certainly has to do with meaning in some sense. So what does it mean that we're going to study meaning? Well, take a look at the sentences that I have below me. The first one is a sentence that has bad syntax, but we can kind of understand what it means. The Sheldon went Penny's apartment, knocks on door and said, "Penny, penny, penny." That's a sentence that obviously has some bad structure to it. It has bad syntax. But we can sort of understand what it means because we understand all the words and kind of can figure out how they logically would go together. Take a look at the other sentence, which is syntactically well formed. We can even make a syntax tree out of this sentence, and all of the parts line up nicely into their correct spots. But the sentence doesn't really mean anything. How can physics be angry? And how can Leonard be the owner of angry physics? How can physics dislike something? And how can a couch be theoretical? So these sentences illustrate how you can have a sentence that's syntactically well formed, but not semantically. And you can have another sentence that has some kind of semantic meaning, but it's not syntactically well formed. That's the difference between semantics and syntax. And I want to start off our analysis of meaning by asking a simple question. What is the meaning of the word sword? And at first, it should be pretty obvious what a sword is. We know what swords are. In fact, we recognize all of these different things as swords, even though they have different shapes physically and different forms. And swords can have different purposes as well. For example, William Wallace uses his sword to slay Englishmen, but an Olympic fencer uses his sword to win a match, hopefully without slaying anyone. So we can recognize all of these things as swords without any difficulty, but it starts to get a little fuzzy around the edges. For example, is a lightsaber a sword? How about the wooden training swords they used to beat the crap out of Tom Cruise in The Last Samurai? Are those swords? Is a toy sword a sword? Is it a sword if it's made out of metal and it's just dull? Is it a sword if it's inflatable? And we can even ask, is this a sword? Or is it just a digital representation of a sword on your computer screen? And even if you have a clear idea of whether all of those things were swords or not, there's no clear line between how big something has to be before it's a sword. So we know that a Swiss Army knife is not a sword, but is a machete a sword? Or is it a sword if you're using it as a weapon, but not if you're using it as a tool to get through the jungle? I ask all these questions only to say that I don't have an answer. But I do have some helpful ways that we can think about what it means to be a sword. So when I first asked you what a sword is, you might have said something along the lines of this definition that I took from Google. A sword is a weapon with a long metal blade and a hilt with a handguard used for thrusting or striking, now typically worn as part of ceremonial dress. Now, that's fine, but that's not what the word sword actually means. That definition is not what a sword actually is. That definition is just a set of different words that help us get a better idea of what a sword is. And by that definition, we have no problem recognizing this as a sword. We see that it's a weapon with a long metal blade, with a hilt and a handguard, used for thrusting and striking, and now typically worn as part of ceremonial dress. So this item fits the definition. But we don't just look to that definition to understand what a sword is. For example, what happens if the blade was not made of metal, but of some kind of hardened carbon fiber? We would still have no problem recognizing it as a sword. Or what if people stopped using these items for ceremonial dress? Would we say, well, I guess that thing is no longer a sword because a sword must be used as part of ceremonial dress? No, it's still a sword whether or not it fits that definition. Also, what happens if you have a sword without a handguard? Is Arwen holding a sword in this picture, or is it some other kind of unidentified weapon without a name? So clearly, the definition that we saw in the previous slides was not actually a set of necessary and sufficient features that an object must have in order to be considered a sword. That definition was describing a prototype, which is the clearest example of a word. So an Ewok and Mr. Spock might be aliens, but a better example of the word alien might be E.T. or the big-brained Martians from Mars Attacks. A robin might be a prototype for the word bird, but an ostrich is still a bird. A good way of thinking about words is as linguistic signs. And when we're talking about signs, we're going to be thinking about relationships between the signifier and something that is signified. The signifier in language is the words themselves. So that could be a spoken word, like the sound waves of the words that I am producing right now. It could be a hand sign in a sign language. Or it could be the letters of a written word. And all of these things represent something in the real world. And that thing is the signified. It's the concept in the world that those signifiers refer to. So for example, the signifier in the word DeLorean would be the sound waves that I'm producing, or the letters of the word that you can see here on the screen. And the thing that's signified is the car itself. And this slide can even be a little bit misleading because the picture that I have next to the word signified is not actually the thing that's signified because it's a picture of the actual car. I just can't put an actual car on the screen in order to illustrate my point. And the relationship between the linguistic form and the actual meaning of the word can take a few different forms. It can be an icon or something that actually resembles what it represents. This is like onomatopoeia, like meow or bloop, which actually kind of sound like the words they represent. You could also make the argument that some words are indexical. Like, have you ever noticed how the word nose in a lot of languages starts with the letter N or M? If you watched my phonetics video earlier in this series, you might have a good idea why that might be. Some researchers think that that might actually be because N and M are nasal sounds, and you actually close your mouth and force the air to go through your nasal cavity and out your nose. But by and large, the vast majority of all words in all spoken languages are symbolic, which means that there's absolutely no relationship between the word itself and the meaning of the word. So if you didn't speak English, you could hear the words DeLorean, Wookiee, and sword and have absolutely no idea what they mean because the words themselves are no hint whatsoever towards the meaning of the word. And I want to repeat right now that linguistics actually is not concerned with the way words are spelled or written on a page. So in some languages, you might be able to find some interesting connections between the way that a word is spelled. Like maybe if a Chinese symbol looks like the word it represents, or if you go to ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. Maybe sometime way down the line, the Phoenician alphabet letters looked like something that they were supposed to represent. But writing systems are not actually part of a language itself. And so while it's very interesting, all of that falls outside the realm of linguistics. And because almost all words have arbitrary meanings, there's actually not too much that linguistics can tell us about the meaning of words. There's no grammatical analysis we can do on the sounds of the word Wookiee that tell us anything about what it means. So while we can do some interesting thought experiments about what the word sword means, this can only take us so far as linguistics is concerned. We can talk about the grammatical implications of combining two morphemes, like the root word sword and the plural suffix s. But when you just take one morpheme by itself, there's really not anything semantics can tell us based off of the sounds of the word. And before we go any further, I want to talk about something that comes up in conversation a lot that has to do with the meaning of a word based off of what it used to mean. To be fair, there are two valid ways of looking at the meaning of a word. One is synchronic, meaning you're looking at one moment in time, and the other is diachronic. You look at the word and its meaning as it passes through time. And there are very valid reasons to look at why a word meant something a long time ago, or how it has changed over time. But as it relates to this video series, and realistically as it relates to most of the people who are watching my channel because they're language learners just trying to speak the language as it exists today, we really only ever have to worry about synchronic semantics. And that's why we can listen to the Katy Perry song, "You're So Gay," and not wonder if maybe she meant what our great-grandparents understood the word gay to mean. Words change in meaning, and now the word gay means what it means now. This isn't the Flintstones song. And again, it is interesting to look at words from a diachronic point of view. For example, in the 1200s, the word silly meant happy, and then it changed to blessed or holy, and pious, and then it changed to innocent. From innocent, it started to mean harmless and pitiable or weak. And then from weak, it went to feeble in mind, lacking in reason, foolish. And then once you get to foolish, you start to understand how it changed to what it means today, which is something very close to foolish. By the way, I got all this information from Edym Online, which is a great resource if you're interested in etymology. But I'm going to stop there because the word silly means what it means today, and it doesn't matter what it used to mean. So if you go to church and call your priest silly, I'm not going to defend you. So now that we're looking at words from a synchronic point of view, it can be more interesting to compare the meaning of two different words rather than looking at the meaning of one individual word, like we did earlier with sword. And there are different ways that words can relate to each other. You probably already know what a synonym is. It's a word with the same meaning or a very close meaning to another word, like car and automobile, or fart and flatulate. And depending on your dialect, you might actually consider two words to be synonyms that two other people would not consider to be synonyms, like dinner and supper. For some people it's the same thing, for some people they're different. A homonym is a word that is pronounced the same as another word, but with a different meaning. And technically, I think by the definition of homonym, it could also be two words that are spelt the same, but like I said, linguists almost never care about spelling. Polysemy is one word with multiple closely related meanings, but they are actually different. And I have to be careful with the pronunciation of that word, because I used to always call it polysemy, but I'm pretty sure it's actually pronounced polysemy. I guess someone can correct me if I'm wrong. For example, you could say, I have 2 legs, and that chair over there has 4 legs. And we understand that we're not actually talking about the same kind of legs, but there's a very clear link between my legs and the legs of a chair. You could also say the same thing about the head on your shoulders, or someone who is the head of a company, or the head of a band. There's a pretty clear connection between the part of your body that controls all the rest of it, and the head of a company who controls the company. Metonymy is also a very interesting aspect of semantics. And again, I have to be very careful because I always used to call this word metonymy, but I just looked it up and I guess it's metonymy. So anyways, a metonym is a word that is used as a substitute for a closely related word. For example, you could say, she drank a whole bottle all by herself. But did she really drink a bottle, or did she drink whatever was in the bottle? You see what I'm saying? So metonyms are very commonly the word for a container that you use to actually refer to whatever is inside the container. It also happens a lot with city names. For example, you would say Washington when you're actually talking about the US government. You could also say, we just got an important announcement from the White House. But the White House didn't send out an important announcement, it came from the president. Metonymy is also why we get the names of funny blog articles like this one. 10 home beer delivery options to keep your fridge stocked during COVID-19. Now, COVID-19 is the name of a disease. So how can you do anything during a disease? Doesn't make any sense, but we understand what it means because of metonymy. Another term you need to know is hyponym. And a hyponym is a word that falls within the umbrella of a larger word, but it is more specific. So the word pine is a hyponym for tree, because you can imagine if you had a Venn diagram of everything that is a tree, the trees would be much bigger, and then the word pine would be a concentric circle on the inside that is totally encapsulated within the tree circle. And hyponymy is actually very interesting from a semantic point of view because it can help us make inferences about things that were not explicitly stated. And of course, this is probably something that comes natural, and you don't need me to explain it because you automatically do this every day. But you don't realize that hyponymy is why you're able to make these kind of inferences. And what I mean by that is that if you take the sentence, I played with 2 Ewoks, this sentence entails that you also played with 2 aliens, if you accept Ewok as a hyponym of alien. But if you take the sentence, I played with 2 aliens, this does not entail that you played with 2 Ewoks. And if you catch someone who thinks it does entail that, you can call them out because they're making a logical fallacy. Just because hyponymy goes one way doesn't mean it goes the other. And in addition to looking at the actual lexical meaning of individual words, we can also pay attention to the semantic role that a word plays within the situation described by a sentence. For example, in the sentence, Katniss gave Peeta the berries, we see that Katniss is the agent because she's the person that is deliberately performing the action. The berries are the theme because they're the thing that's undergoing the action. They're what is being acted upon. And Peeta is the recipient in this situation because he's the one that's receiving possession of the berries. And there are many different semantic roles that a word can have. And I'm not going to go over all of them now. If you're interested in that, you can look it up on Wikipedia. Another word for semantic role that you'll often hear is thematic relations. So if you just search that on Wikipedia, you can learn all about that. And I won't have to go into details here. But I do want to be very careful to specify that a semantic role is not the same thing as a syntactic function, or sometimes you'll hear these called grammatical functions. Okay? And I want to be clear about that because when I say that the agent is the person or thing in the sentence that's doing the action, the first thing that might come to your mind is that sounds an awful lot like the subject of the sentence. And you're right, because we often refer to the subject of the sentence as the thing that's doing the action of the verb. But remember that syntax looks at the structure of the sentence, while semantics looks at the meaning. So syntactic functions fulfill a role in the structure of the sentence, while the semantic roles have to do with what is actually happening in the situation described by the sentence. And as an example, if you look at the sentences below, you see that in the first sentence, Carol Baskin is the subject of the sentence because she's the one that's doing the feeding. Okay? But in the second sentence, because we changed it to the passive voice, Carol is no longer the subject of the sentence, even though both sentences are describing the exact same situation. There's no change in meaning, there's only a change in structure. That means that each individual noun phrase in the sentences below maintain the same semantic roles, while the syntactic functions change along with the structure of the sentence. So Carol Baskin is the agent in both sentences, but she's the subject in the first one and not in the second one. So hopefully that's a clear illustration of the difference between semantics and syntax. As usual, I only had enough time to just scratch the surface about semantics in this video. But if you click the little subscribe button below and the bell icon next to it, you will be notified the next time I release a video about semantics or linguistics. And as usual, if you have any questions about semantics or linguistics, or honestly, even about anything, whether or not it's related to this video, please leave me a comment in the discussion section below, and I will get back to you as soon as you can. I love hearing from my subscribers and interacting with you guys. So, thanks for watching the video, and I'll see you all next time.